In the lavish heart of New Orleans, a wealthy businessman, his alluring au pair, and a web of betrayal set the stage for a shocking crime that will leave you questioning the price of desire and deception. A twisted love triangle ignites a series of dark events that unravel a carefully constructed life, culminating in an unthinkable act of violence. This tragic tale exposes how the consequences of forbidden passions, manipulation, and lies can destroy everything in their wake. What began as a simple affair spiraled into an irreversible tragedy, reminding us how unchecked emotions can lead to disastrous, deadly outcomes. Before we dive deep into this shocking story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more chilling tales that reveal the darkest truths of human nature. Charles Beaumont, a 47-year-old successful businessman, and his wife Lauren Beaumont, 42, had long been considered the epitome of success and affluence in New Orleans. With their luxurious lifestyle and a sprawling home in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods, their lives seemed flawless. Their two children, Olivia, 8, and Julian, 6, were the picture of innocence, doted on by their parents. Lauren, a socialite with a busy schedule full of high-profile events and charitable commitments, barely had the time to manage the household duties that came with their opulent lifestyle. Wanting to provide the best for her family, she made the decision to hire an au pair. Jasmine Reed, a stunning 21-year-old with captivating beauty and alluring curves. Jasmine was hired as a live-in au pair, tasked with caring for the Beaumont children. Her charming personality and youth brought a fresh energy to the household, and she quickly became adored by Olivia and Julian. Jasmine had been raised in a modest family, and her ambition to climb the social ladder was evident. She knew exactly how to use her beauty and charm to catch the attention of the men around her, and Charles was no exception. Though Lauren's busy schedule often kept her away from the house, she trusted Jasmine and was grateful for the help. Little did she know, Jasmine's beauty and presence had not only captivated her children but had ignited dangerous feelings in both Charles and her son Tyler Beaumont, who frequently visited the house. Tyler, a 23-year-old college student, was drawn to Jasmine's youthful energy and seductiveness, though he was careful to mask his attraction. As the days passed, the Beaumont household became a tangled web of unspoken desires. Charles, despite his outward devotion to his wife, found himself unable to resist the growing attraction he felt toward Jasmine. Her flirtations were subtle at first, but Jasmine had a knack for making Charles feel desired, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Tyler, on the other hand, began to notice the growing tension between his father and the au pair, and he couldn't deny his own infatuation with her. What started as innocent flirtation soon began to blur the lines between what was right and what was forbidden. Jasmine, ever the opportunist, began playing both men, seducing them one by one. While Charles was focused on maintaining his family's image, Tyler grew more and more involved with Jasmine, unaware of the growing tension his father felt. Little did they all know, the lines between lust, love, and betrayal were about to cross in a deadly way. Jasmine Reed had always been a woman who turned heads, but her beauty was more than skin deep, it was her weapon. With her striking curves, radiant skin, and captivating smile, she effortlessly drew people in. But beneath her charm lay a calculating mind. When she entered the Beaumont household as an au pair, her intent was to keep her head down and do her job, but the allure of wealth and power slowly changed her perspective. At first, Jasmine's interactions with Charles were innocent. She'd linger a bit too long in conversations, casually compliment him, and find reasons to be in the same room. She noticed how his eyes would trail after her when he thought no one was looking. One evening, when Lauren was away for a gala, Jasmine saw her chance. She prepared Charles's favorite drink and brought it to his study. "You've been working so hard lately, Mr. Beaumont," she said softly, placing the glass on his desk. Her tone was innocent, but the way she leaned over, her blouse slightly unbuttoned, told another story. Charles tried to brush off the tension, but Jasmine's presence was intoxicating. That night, their conversation drifted into personal territory, and for the first time in years, Charles felt truly seen. The first kiss was hesitant, filled with guilt and longing, but it quickly turned into a passion that neither of them could stop. Meanwhile, Jasmine had also caught the eye of Tyler Beaumont, Charles's 23-year-old son from his first marriage. Tyler frequently visited the house, and Jasmine's warm demeanor and undeniable beauty made her impossible to ignore. Unlike Charles, who was reserved and cautious, Tyler was direct. One evening, as they sat on the patio after the family had gone to bed, Tyler made his move. "You're too beautiful to be just an au pair," he said, his voice low and confident. Jasmine laughed, brushing off the comment, but Tyler persisted. Over time, their late-night conversations turned into secret rendezvous. Jasmine felt a thrill in balancing both affairs. With Charles, it was about security and power. With Tyler, it was raw passion and excitement. She knew it was dangerous, but she thrived on the control she had over them. Each man thought he was the only one, and Jasmine carefully curated her behavior to keep them in the dark. Weeks turned into months, and Jasmine began to feel off. At first, she dismissed the nausea and fatigue as stress, but when her symptoms persisted, she took a pregnancy test. The two bold lines confirmed her worst fear: she was pregnant. Panic set in as she tried to calculate who the father might be. Both Charles and Tyler were possibilities, but Jasmine wasn't sure. Sitting alone in her room that night, Jasmine weighed her options. Blaming Tyler would be too risky, he had no wealth or power to offer. Charles, however, was a different story. If she played her cards right, she could secure a future for herself and her child. The thought of being tied to the Beaumont fortune was too tempting to resist. The next day, Jasmine approached Charles with the news. She waited until Lauren had left for a charity event and found Charles in his study. "Charles, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. She had rehearsed this moment, crafting every word to evoke sympathy. "I'm pregnant." "It's yours." Charles froze, his mind racing. The guilt of their affair was already eating at him, but the idea of a child brought it to a whole new level. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do. I can't do this alone. I need you." Charles felt trapped. He couldn't deny his responsibility, but the implications of their affair becoming public were too much to bear. He promised to take care of her and the baby, but inside, he was unraveling. As Jasmine worked to secure Charles's support, her behavior began to shift. She was more assertive, more demanding, and less careful about hiding her tracks. Lauren, who had always trusted Jasmine, started to notice the change. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but when she asked Jasmine about it, Jasmine brushed her off with a smile. Jasmine's confidence in her plan was growing, but she underestimated how far Charles would go to protect his secrets. What began as an affair born of loneliness and manipulation was quickly spiraling into something far more dangerous. Lauren Beaumont was a woman who prided herself on her intuition. Over the years, she'd learned to juggle the demanding roles of wife, mother, and business partner to her powerful husband, Charles. Yet lately, her carefully balanced life felt off-kilter. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes in the household. Jasmine, their once reliable au pair, seemed distracted, often slipping away during the evenings and finding excuses to leave the house. The warmth and attentiveness Jasmine once displayed toward Olivia and Julian had waned, replaced by a distant, almost calculated demeanor. Lauren first noticed the shift during dinner one evening. Jasmine, who usually sat with the children and engaged them in cheerful conversation, seemed preoccupied, her eyes darting toward Charles. The exchange was subtle, but Lauren caught the flicker of unease in her husband's expression. That night, as they prepared for bed, Lauren mentioned it casually. "Jasmine seems different lately," she said, brushing her hair in front of the vanity. "Have you noticed?" Charles, already under immense stress, stiffened. "She's probably just tired. You know how demanding the kids can be," he replied quickly, avoiding her gaze. Lauren nodded, but the answer didn't satisfy her. Over the next few weeks, she paid closer attention to Jasmine's behavior. There were unexplainable absences, trips to run errands that stretched far longer than necessary. Her late nights in the kitchen or on the patio became more frequent, and there was a newfound boldness in how she carried herself around the house. It was as though she no longer cared to blend into the background as an employee. Lauren's suspicions deepened and she overheard a hushed conversation between Charles and Jasmine in his study. The door was slightly ajar, and while she couldn't make out every word, the tension in their voices was unmistakable. "We'll figure this out," she heard Charles say, his tone low and urgent. Jasmine's response was softer, almost pleading, but the words, "I can't do this alone," sent a chill down Lauren's spine. Unable to confront either of them without proof, Lauren decided to test the waters. One afternoon, as Jasmine was preparing snacks for the children, Lauren casually leaned against the kitchen counter. "You've been working so hard lately, Jasmine. Maybe you should take a break, spend some time with your family," she said, her tone friendly but probing. Jasmine froze for a split second before flashing her practiced smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Beaumont, but I'm fine. The kids keep me busy, and I love being here." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Still, you've seemed a little distracted lately. If there's something going on, you can always talk to me." Jasmine's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Nothing's going on, Mrs. Beaumont. I promise." The evasive answer only fueled Lauren's unease. That night, she confided in Charles, hoping for reassurance. "Something's not right with Jasmine. I can feel it. I think we need to sit down and talk to her." Charles, who was already at his breaking point, snapped. "You're overthinking things, Lauren. She's just a young woman trying to do her job. Let it go." The sharpness in his tone startled her. It wasn't like Charles to dismiss her concerns so harshly. The distance between them, which she'd attributed to their busy schedules, now felt like something more. Meanwhile, Charles was spiraling. Jasmine's demands were becoming more insistent, and her confidence in their arrangement unnerved him. She began hinting at their affair more openly, making remarks that could easily be misconstrued if overheard. "You know, Charles," she said one evening while the kids were asleep, "I've been thinking about what our life could look like. You, me, and the baby. A fresh start." Charles's heart raced. "Jasmine, we've talked about this. You need to keep things quiet. For now, at least." Jasmine's eyes darkened. "For now? Or forever? Because I'm not going to disappear quietly, Charles. I deserve more than being your dirty little secret." The veiled threat sent a wave of panic through him. The walls felt like they were closing in. His carefully curated life, his marriage, his reputation, his family, was unraveling, and Jasmine held the strings. Lauren, sensing the growing tension in the house but unable to pinpoint its cause, started to feel isolated. She noticed how Charles avoided her questions, how he seemed more irritable and distant. Jasmine's presence, once a comfort, now felt like a looming shadow over their family. The household, once defined by order and routine, was now a place of secrets, lies, and growing distrust. The facade of perfection that Charles and Lauren had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, and neither of them could see the full extent of the damage, yet. Charles sat in his dimly lit study, the weight of Jasmine's escalating demands pressing down on him like a vice. The pregnancy had been a ticking time bomb, and Jasmine's insistence that he leave his wife and marry her had become unbearable. Tonight, she had upped the ante, threatening to expose their affair if he didn't comply. The thought of losing his family, his wealth, and his reputation was more than he could handle. Jasmine entered the study, her demeanor bold and confident. She had dressed deliberately for this confrontation, wearing a tight-fitting dress that highlighted her curves. She knew her power over Charles, and she intended to use it one last time. "We need to talk," she said, her tone firm. Charles looked up, his face strained. "Jasmine, this isn't the time." "It's never the time with you," she shot back, stepping closer. "I'm carrying your child, Charles. You can't just brush this under the rug." He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "I told you I'd take care of the child. Financially, you'll be set. But marriage? Leaving my family? That's not going to happen." Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. "Not going to happen," she repeated, her voice rising. "You think I'm just going to let you throw me and this baby away like some inconvenience?" "You knew what this was," Charles said sharply, rising from his chair. "You knew from the beginning that I wasn't going to leave my wife." Jasmine crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "Then maybe Lauren should know the truth. Maybe the whole city should know who you really are, a cheating, lying coward." Charles's chest tightened. "Don't you dare," he warned, his voice dangerously low. Jasmine took a step closer, her confidence unshaken. "What's stopping me, Charles? You think I care about your threats? I'll ruin you if I have to." The argument escalated, their voices echoing through the study. Charles's anger boiled over, his control slipping with every word she hurled at him. Jasmine, sensing his rising fury, pushed harder, determined to make him bend to her will. "You're nothing without me," she sneered. "Your wealth, your power, it means nothing if I decide to take it all away." In that moment, something inside Charles snapped. Without thinking, he lunged at her, his hands closing around her throat. Jasmine's eyes widened in shock as she struggled against him, but his grip tightened. The room filled with the sound of her desperate gasps for air, her hands clawing at his as she fought for her life. Charles's mind raced. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The consequences of her threats played out in his head like a nightmare, his family torn apart, his name dragged through the mud, his empire crumbling. He couldn't let it happen. When Jasmine's body finally went limp, Charles stumbled back, horrified by what he had done. Her lifeless form lay crumpled on the floor, her once vivid eyes now dull and empty. The gravity of his actions hit him like a freight train. He had killed her. Charles stood frozen in the study, staring at Jasmine's lifeless body sprawled on the floor. The heated argument had spiraled out of control, and in a moment of blind rage, he had killed her. His heart pounded as the reality of what he'd done sank in. He couldn't undo it, but he could try to cover his tracks. He quickly composed himself, dragging Jasmine's body into the garage. The weight of her lifeless form made his movements clumsy, but adrenaline pushed him forward. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to figure out the best way to hide what he'd done. He knew burying her on his property was too risky. Lauren or the kids could stumble across something, or someone might notice disturbed ground. He had to take her somewhere remote, somewhere no one would think to look. He bundled Jasmine into the trunk of his car, wrapping her body in an old tarp he found in the garage. The dark night cloaked his actions as he drove out of the gated community and into the quieter outskirts of New Orleans. The tension in his chest grew unbearable as he scanned the area for an isolated spot. Finally, he found an overgrown stretch of public land, far enough from any houses or prying eyes. Pulling off the road, he parked the car and grabbed the shovel he had brought with him. He worked quickly, digging a shallow grave beneath a canopy of trees. The damp soil clung to his hands and clothes, but he didn't stop until he had created a space big enough to conceal Jasmine's body. He lowered her into the grave, her face still wrapped in the tarp, and covered her with dirt. As he patted the ground flat, his mind raced with his next steps. He had to fabricate a story to explain her sudden disappearance. Returning to the car, he drove home under the cover of darkness, rehearsing his alibi in his mind. The next morning, when Lauren asked where Jasmine was, Charles didn't flinch. "She called me last night," he said calmly. "She wasn't feeling well and said she needed a break. I told her to take as much time as she needed." Lauren furrowed her brow. "That's odd. She didn't mention anything to me." "She probably didn't want to worry you," Charles replied smoothly. "I'm sure she'll be back in a few days." Lauren nodded reluctantly, though a seed of doubt lingered in her mind. A crisp autumn morning began like any other for Camille Harper, a local New Orleans resident who regularly walked her golden retriever, Bailey, through the wooded area on the outskirts of town. But this morning was different. As Bailey sniffed and explored, the dog began barking furiously and clawing at the ground beneath a cluster of trees. At first, Camille tried to pull Bailey away, thinking he'd found an animal burrow or something unimportant. Then, a foul odor hit her, a smell so strong and unnatural that her stomach churned. She froze, realizing something wasn't right. Gripping her phone with trembling hands, Camille dialed 911 and explained what she'd found. "It smells like death. I think there's a body buried here." Within minutes, police arrived and cordoned off the area. A forensic team began carefully excavating the disturbed soil. The officers' grim faces confirmed Camille's suspicions as they unearthed the body of a young woman wrapped in a tarp. The identity was quickly confirmed as Jasmine Reed, the missing au pair whose name had recently come up in police reports. Jasmine's body was transported to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy revealed the horrifying truth. The cause of death was confirmed as strangulation, with bruises around her neck indicating the use of hands. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been overpowered quickly. The medical examiner also confirmed Jasmine was several weeks pregnant, adding a layer of complexity to the investigation. Detectives immediately turned their focus to the Beaumonts, Jasmine's last known employers. The au pair agency confirmed Jasmine had been working for Charles and Lauren Beaumont for over a year, and her sudden disappearance had raised suspicions. Detectives arrived at the Beaumont home, their questions pointed but measured. Lauren, unaware of her husband's actions, repeated the story Charles had told her. Jasmine had left abruptly after claiming she wasn't feeling well. "We didn't think to call because she mentioned she needed space," Lauren explained, her voice tinged with unease. Charles, on the other hand, maintained a calm facade, reiterating the same story. "She wasn't feeling well. I told her to take a break. That's all I know," he said, carefully avoiding eye contact with the investigators. But the detectives weren't convinced. A search warrant for the home and property was issued, allowing investigators to comb through the Beaumont residence. During the search, detectives discovered the home's extensive surveillance system. When questioned about it, Lauren explained that the cameras had been installed for security purposes. Charles's heart sank as he realized his critical mistake. He had forgotten to delete the footage from the night of the murder. Detectives reviewed the recordings, starting with the common areas. One of the earlier clips showed Jasmine and Charles in the study during what appeared to be a tense argument. Jasmine's body language suggested fear, while Charles's towering frame loomed over her menacingly. Another clip revealed Jasmine's interactions with Tyler, the son, in the kitchen, a clear indication of her flirtatious nature. However, it was the footage from the study on the night of her disappearance that sealed Charles's fate. The recording showed a heated argument between Charles and Jasmine, escalating into a violent struggle. The horrifying moment when Charles strangled Jasmine was captured in vivid detail. The footage also showed him dragging her lifeless body out of the study, further corroborating the autopsy findings. With the evidence mounting, Charles Beaumont became the prime suspect in Jasmine's murder. Investigators pieced together the sequence of events, bolstered by the autopsy, the discovered grave, and the damning footage. The lead detective, Eleanor Monroe, addressed the media in a press conference. "This is a tragic case of betrayal, manipulation, and violence. We have solid evidence linking Charles Beaumont to the murder of Jasmine Reed, and justice will be served. Charles Beaumont's arrest sent shockwaves through New Orleans, and the media quickly latched onto the salacious details of the case. A wealthy businessman caught in a scandal involving his au pair and a secret affair was a story too explosive to ignore. Within hours of his arrest, news outlets plastered his face across every screen, alongside headlines dissecting the shocking betrayal and brutal murder of Jasmine Reed. Lauren, reeling from the revelations, found herself at the center of public scrutiny. While she had initially been seen as a victim of her husband's lies and infidelity, whispers of her potential role in the household tension began to surface. As reporters camped outside the Beaumont mansion, Lauren withdrew from public life, shielding her children from the chaos. Charles's trial began swiftly, given the overwhelming evidence against him. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their case, starting with the footage recovered from the Beaumont home. Jurors watched in stunned silence as the video showed Jasmine confronting Charles about her pregnancy and his violent reaction that ended in her death. The footage also revealed their affair, further tarnishing Charles's already fragile reputation. The defense tried to paint a picture of a man pushed to his breaking point, a victim of Jasmine's manipulation and extortion. They argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced Charles, using her pregnancy to trap him into a life he didn't want. But the prosecution countered by emphasizing Charles's calculated efforts to cover up the murder, including his lies to Lauren and the attempted disposal of Jasmine's body. Lauren was called to testify, her presence in court adding a new layer of tension. She recounted the days leading up to Jasmine's disappearance, including Charles's claim that Jasmine had requested time off. Her voice trembled as she described her shock upon learning about the hidden cameras and the affair, but she remained composed, refusing to defend Charles's actions. Throughout the trial, Charles sat stoically, showing little emotion. When asked if he regretted his actions, he avoided direct answers, instead blaming his wife's neglect and Jasmine's manipulation for his emotional unraveling. His lack of remorse alienated the jury, who seemed unimpressed by his attempts to shift blame. The prosecution's closing arguments were damning, emphasizing that Charles's wealth and power did not place him above the law. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days before delivering their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Charles was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that many felt was lenient given the brutality of the crime. The public response was mixed. While some sympathized with the pressures Charles claimed to have faced, most viewed his actions as an inexcusable betrayal of trust and humanity. For Lauren, the trial's conclusion offered little solace. Her husband was now a convicted murderer, and the truth about his affair with Jasmine was a permanent stain on their family's legacy. She moved out of the Beaumont mansion, seeking a fresh start for herself and her children. Yet, the whispers and stares followed her wherever she went, a constant reminder of the nightmare she could never fully escape. As Charles began his sentence, confined to a cell far from the life of privilege he once knew, Lauren focused on rebuilding what remained of her family. She hoped to shield Olivia and Julian from the weight of their father's actions, vowing to ensure they would grow up with better values than the man who had once been their hero. The fallout from Charles's actions left scars that would never fully heal, but Lauren remained determined to forge a new path forward. This heartbreaking story is a grim reminder of how unchecked emotions, envy, betrayal, and manipulation can unravel even the most seemingly perfect lives, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. One man's decision to act out of anger and fear not only destroyed a woman's future but shattered his own family. The consequences of his actions will echo for generations, leaving irreversible damage in its wake. Can betrayal ever truly justify such extreme actions? What are the limits of forgiveness and understanding in the face of infidelity, and how can we avoid the catastrophic consequences of unchecked rage? If you found this story as shocking as we did, make sure to like and subscribe to Crime Chronicles for more chilling tales that expose the darkest depths of human behavior and betrayal.